Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hooray! All right.
Oh, there we go. There's
we
video.
Can see you.
See me?
Awesome. Yeah, we can see you now. Perfect.
All right. Okay. I was like, uh-oh, blinking circle, doom forever here.
Absolutely.
That's funny. Yeah, I was like, well, it would just make sense. We'd have more technical problems.
Of course. I'm taping my cell phone to my jury-rigged cell phone stand here.
That's awesome. I've done that before.
Okay.
Awesome. So I think
how
we're
you doing?
doing good. I'm excited to talk to you. Honestly, I was shocked you were available to do an interview. Just because I know you've got the book coming out and everything. So there's a lot of stuff going on, I guess.
Yeah, definitely super busy. But I mean, not so busy that I see from my perspective is totally the opposite. This person comes out of nowhere and says, "Hey, want to do an interview?" Yeah. Sure I do.
So my wife and I, we just finished listening to the book. It's probably, I think, my third or maybe fourth time listening to the book, honestly.
Oh, wow.
I just tagged along to say hello towards the beginning.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, she's gonna head out just so it can be like a one-on-one type conversation. But we've got our dogs here.
Kinda. They're both.
Yeah, they're both actually asleep. They've been playing a lot. So so anyway, I'll tell you a little bit about us. I really like science fiction stories. I grew up watching things like Star Wars and Star Trek and Outer Limits with my dad. Elizabeth grew up watching a lot of fantasy things, a lot of Disney stuff. She loves the fantasy worlds of like Harry Potter, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which are where our dogs' names come from. So we've got Buffy from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Luna the husky from Luna Lovegood from Harry Potter. And that's part of why I think your book just meshed so well with us, because it's a fantasy world with a lot of sci-fi elements in it. They talk about heat,
Harry
death.
Potter meets War of the Worlds, baby.
Exactly. Yeah, it's great. And so
did you
that's
like
a good
it?
comparison there.
Did you like it? I gotta ask if you liked it.
I do. Well, he's listened to it a few times, and he was like, "Oh my!" The author responded to me. Now you have to listen to this book and help me.
You have to listen to it now,
and help me come up with questions. And I read books all the time, and Andrew, he is huge with Audible. He doesn't read books, so the fact that he bought the sequel for Kindle is a big deal. We
were talking about it. We have 140 audiobooks that I've listened to, all of them. This is the first one out of all of them that I am buying a physical book that I have to use my eyes to read. So I'm excited to read Prisoner.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, you've convinced me you're a fan. Okay.
Yeah, it's
fun. Yeah, I like the story a lot.
I have a coworker that I convinced to listen to Contractor, and he got to the end and he's like, "Okay, but where's the second book? Because it leaves off, and I need to know what happens." And that was a few years ago. And ever since then, he's always, whenever I suggest a book to him, he's like, "It's not another Contractor, is it? I need to know what's going to happen."
Oh, man.
But he's excited
that
too.
Was a mistake.
But it's so good.
I will explain in good time. I will explain myself. I promise I have good reasons. I feel so bad. There was one day, this was like 2 weeks ago, when I was really getting prepped. Something's going on with my Facebook messages where I on my page, I cannot accept Facebook messages, but all the old messages are still there. And I just went down, I looked at all this huge inbox of messages I hadn't even looked at, because I don't really like social media, honestly. And just message after message after message from people. "Hey, just checking in. Got any updates? Hey, you still alive? Really looking forward to the sequel." Hey, just going back 4 years. I felt like I was like, the mini-me of George R.R. Martin just screwing people over.
That's the comparison I always think of too, is like George R.R. Martin. It's like, all he does is write, and he's not finishing his stories.
He's good enough. He can get away with it. I'm not quite, it's like, so, what can I say? Life intervened, but I mean, we'll get there.
All right. I'm going to put this one to bed.
Take her away.
And it was really nice meeting you. I'm going to be listening in.
Yeah,
for sure.
You too. Yeah.
Bye.
Let's see. So one of the most important things that I wanted to ask is I wanted to have you do a kind of just a summary of the Contractor, or a synopsis, so that you can kind of just give people who aren't familiar with it kind of an idea of the story and kind of what it encompasses.
Sure. Contractor, the first book, Contractor, is the meeting of like a couple concepts. And the first is totally Daniel, who is the reluctant hero, the classic reluctant hero. Taken a step further, I really wanted him to be a little bit misanthropic. He's been beaten down by life. He's not quick to trust, which I think I show kind of in the first part of the book. And it's made personal for him, and he has no choice but to get involved, even though he still doesn't want to be he really doesn't want to be involved throughout the whole story, even though he comes to accept his role in it. And then that is kind of meshed in with the setting, which is it's Harry Potter, maybe a little bit more realistic Harry Potter. I tried to kind of take away the magic words and the wands and the trolls coming in on Halloween night, and make it a little bit more what would a political world look like if it was real Harry Potter, if there really were wizards and witches and magicians in a secret society living amongst us. Except there's an alien invasion. Now what do you do? Who's going to fight the aliens when magic is real? Of course, it's got to be the magicians. And then you take those two things and then you smash it with the theme of power, and what power does to people and what people are willing to do to keep power and grow their own power. And what's the consequence of a magic where the magic makes you more powerful? Where does that end? We all there's always this classic story of like, there's the evil bad guy. He's going to unlock the magical seal or get the one ring, and then he's going to take over the world, and then what? What happens when that villain continues, when that villain becomes more and more powerful, when they develop ways to continuously grow more powerful? What would be the motivation for that? And that's the Vorid. That's what the villains of the story are. So it's kind of all those ideas that I had that I shoved together into that one story, and that makes Contractor.
Awesome. I think you hit all the different elements, because there's a lot there that kind of all unfold. Yeah, it's fun. I hadn't thought of the Lord of the Rings reference, but it makes sense too. I always go to Star Wars because someone explained to me that Star Wars is a fantasy story. I was like, wait, Is it really? And it is. It's a fantasy story. The Force is just magic in space. And it just kind of clicked.
It's space wizards, yeah.
So and just today the sequel to Contractor came out, Prisoner, which is what prompted me to ask you if you want to do an interview. Obviously there is a big gap between the two. Do you want to maybe talk about that gap and what was going on in your life, and maybe whether or not we'll have another big gap between Prisoner and whatever comes after?
Yes. So to answer the second question, no, there will not be as big a gap I've gotten my work-life writing balance down a lot better. But the reason there was a big gap is because I've always written just for myself as a hobby. It was a hobby that started in college in my undergraduate years, and I did it purely for myself. I had stories to tell. I wanted to get them out on paper, and I've written, I think, 11 or 12 books, which are totally different. Some are not, totally have nothing to do with Contractor, completely different concept stories. I've written like 4 books were in one series that I've written that's just kind of sitting on my laptop, and it's complete garbage. It's trash. I mean, I didn't even the dialogue's not structured correctly. The paragraphs don't make sense. When you read it, you're like, oh, you can't read it. When I go back, it's embarrassing. It's
is that something that you struggle with as a writer? That because I mean, so more my background in high school, I was a performer. I sang in choir and I did solos and things like that. I always struggled seeing myself as a good vocalist when I would do my solos, and so I always struggle with that. What people would say about my work versus what I thought of my work was always kind of a struggle.
Not so much because I never intended to publish. It was something I did only for me, and maybe my mother is who really got me into science fiction and fantasy. That's somewhere on my autobiography on the Facebook page. When we were young, she actually read the whole Lord of the Rings to me, and she read Watership Down, if you've ever heard of that book, with the rabbits. They have to leave their home and journey across the land, and A Wrinkle in Time. And I love those books, and I continued to read science fiction and fantasy my whole life. And just one day I was like, you know what, I want to try my hand at writing this stuff. So I never intended for any of it to be published. But eventually it got to the point where, my family and friends were like, hey, what are you doing with all this stuff? You gonna put it out there? And that to get back to the question, I looked at all my books. I was about to go into pharmacy school, and it was going to be I was going to an accelerated pharmacy program where a normal pharmacy degree is 6 years, and this degree you earn in 2 years and 9 months. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to be busy. And yeah, I was working on the weekends too. So if I don't publish something now, I might not do it. I might not get to it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to define success. If I sell 100 copies of the book, that's going to be great. I'm a successful author. And so I put Contractor up there, and without including any Audible stuff, or whoever's read it through like Kindle Unlimited, I've sold over 10,000 copies of the book,
Wow.
which it's pretty darn good for self-published indie, no marketing, no advertising, just word of mouth of the book all on its own. So it overwhelmed me. I mean, I had no idea that it would be this good. I thought it was pretty good. I picked Contractor from the novels I had written because it seemed to me to have the best kind of complete story arc. There's a beginning, there was a middle, there was an end. It told a story. It had the cliffhanger ending, but that was okay. It was a complete good story arc where we saw kind of the hero's journey. I was like, this is what I want to put out there. And then wildly successful beyond what I could have imagined. And the money was incredibly handy, what it did make, because it got me through pharmacy school in a lot of ways. And especially when, a car breaks down, or, hey, you have to buy this $400 pharmacy textbook that weighs, 20 tons. There were times where I had, in one semester, the first semester we had 7 classes. And then the second semester we had 8 classes. And so, I would go to school at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we would sit in the classroom until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I would go work in the afternoon, the rest of the day, for my part-time pharmacy job. So, I didn't have the mental space to write. I didn't have it. There were days I'd get home, I really wanted to write, and I'd get like 3 lines into it and just be like, I can't even process right now. So 3 years, boom, gone. Of the 5 to 6, you want to say, that I should have maybe been working on the sequel. Honestly, 3 years of my life gone to pharmacy school. And then there was another year where I was settling into my career as a professional pharmacist, where you've got licensing, you've got rules. Suddenly you're responsible for people's lives, and it's not just what you're learning out of a book anymore. You're practicing medicine, and it's a big responsibility. And I think that takes a lot out of it too. And I was also living with my grandmother at the time, and helping to take care of her. Helps cut rent down, living with family. But you also have to live a life too. So I would say that Prisoner took me 2 years, and it's a pretty sizable novel. It's 630 something pages in Kindle. So on those terms, producing Prisoner in 2 years, I think, was a pretty good rate of progress. But what can it is totally my own fault that I threw out a book that it turned out to be pretty good right before I got incredibly busy with my life. But it is what it is.
I can relate to the focus you have to put on your schooling. I did engineering, and the same kind of thing was what I experienced. Through school, there were things I wanted to participate more with, and I just couldn't. I had these goals in mind and these things I wanted to accomplish that I just couldn't do. So I had to set them aside, or I felt like I wouldn't have been able to finish. The level of focus you had to have on those classes was just so much that if I were to allow myself to deviate and kind of go into other areas, I would have not probably got it through.
I totally get it. There's even with things that you love to do, you have a limited amount of brain space. There is, even if all your activities involve just sitting in chairs all day and walking between classes, you are expending mental energy. And I didn't really, I don't think I was ever pushed that hard in my life up until that point, up until pharmacy school. That was what pushed me mentally to my maximum limit. And writing just had to go by the wayside. The only thing I could stand after a day of writing was like taking my grandmother out to eat and then like vegging out with like a video game or something where I didn't have to have that intense focus. And you know what? It's okay because I think Prisoner took a long time, but I think it's very high quality. I think it's probably I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best book I've ever written because I've written a lot and people haven't read them. But I would say it's the most polished book that I've written for sure. So I mean, I'll wait for the reviews. I looked on Amazon earlier and like my first reviews in, and it's 2 stars. And I was like,
I'm sure there will be a lot more reviews to help raise the bar.
Yes, to offset that average. Yeah, I can only cross my fingers and pray. But if my mom and my sister will swing in and bump that average up.
Right.
But,
yeah, I'll be in there too soon.
All right. Yes, I'm counting on you. But it is the most polished thing that I've written, and I think it benefited from that long time frame because there were times where I had things done and I didn't have the energy to write like a new section. So I would go back and just edit a paragraph, like just multiple times, just like cutting out like every useless thing I could find and like really trying to sculpt the metaphors so that they didn't just sound really good, but that it made sense in context and think about like, wait a minute, I brought in this character. What's he doing right now? He should have a scene. I can't just let that go. It's got to be a complete narrative. So I think the book has really, really benefited in a lot of ways from the extra time. But it is what it is, and I'm way more balanced in terms of work and free time. So I think I'll be able to do my writing on a lot more regular basis, and I won't let that happen again because it's not fair, and I really do feel a little bad. I realize it's my life. I can do whatever the hell I want, but at the same time, it sucks when you give people a cliffhanger ending and then you don't deliver anything. That is awful. I've been there as the reader. That's terrible. In fact, when George R.R. Martin, he's the example. When he put out A Dance with Dragons, I had been waiting so long that I dropped it. I dropped the Game of Thrones, the books anyway, because I looked at the monumental task I faced of going back and reading the first 4 books all over again to even begin to understand what would be going on. And I was like, I don't have time for this. That was in pharmacy school, I believe. And I was like, screw it. I can't do it. So I get it.
So we kind of talked about the first book, Contractor, but we haven't really given like a really good synopsis or a pitch or a teaser for Prisoner, if you will. Do you want to give a quick teaser for people that might be interested after hearing about Contractor too?
So Prisoner it completely accelerates the narrative because Contractor happens over several months, and basically the half a year because we have Daniel. Better part of a year. We have Daniel kind of coming the end of high school, so right at the end of the spring, beginning of summer, and it goes all the way until very late fall, beginning of winter. So about half a year. Everything in Prisoner happens in about a week. And what you are going to see is that the plot is not going to progress as much. And I have exchanged the pure plot progression for information progression. And you're going to find out that, in Contractor, Daniel was a big ticket item. He was hot stuff. He was flying around, taking on the Vorid Lord. Spoilers. Doing cool stuff with all the wizards and being a hero. He's a very small piece of a very big world. There is a lot more going on behind the scenes than much of which was hinted at in the first book, but you're gonna get the world in Prisoner. You're gonna get a lot of expansion and a lot of both new information and new questions about who are the real power players. Why is Earth the way it is? Why is what is hell? What is it exactly? Why does the demon world have this relationship with Earth? How do all these major pieces work together? That's what Prisoner is really about. And it's also very much about Eleanor Astor, who we see has a major character role in the first book she is now kind of going to be holding the line back on Earth, and so we're going to see a lot of character development on her end. So that's where Prisoner picks up right immediately where Contractor leaves off, in the very scene where Contractor leaves off, actually. So that's kind of a little overview of what Prisoner really is.
Awesome. I'm already psyched. That's kind of, I really like character development, so I'm excited. And you kind of answered a couple questions I had in the back of my mind too. One that I've been wanting to ask since I first heard of this hell realm or dimension in the first book. Does the existence of a hell dimension insinuate the existence of a heaven dimension at all, or is that something that is a thing?
That that's a tricky question to answer, because if I give you an answer, I may be limiting the potential of the book.
I was worried. Okay, I had a feeling. I was like, there may be a reason we haven't heard of it yet.
Because if I say yes, I'm guaranteeing its existence. If I say no, now I can't write about it if I decide I want it in the book. Yeah. I will. You know what? I'm confident enough in the scope at this point that I can say no. There is not what you would consider a corresponding heaven dimension with a bunch of angels and Jesus Christ and God floating around. I don't want to go there too heavy for very obvious reasons. But there is a mythology, there is a cosmology that kind of ties into what you would expect from Earth's history, but there is no heaven dimension. There is an alternate universe that is a partner to Earth's universe, which we would call the demon world, and that's as hard as I can go into it without giving away too much.
Okay, that's fair. That was one that I've been questioning it, and I was like, man, that's one of those questions that could be a spoiler. It could be just an area that you didn't want to go. Like you're saying, it's like, that's not really an area that I was planning on developing quite right now.
Double spoiler. I have written other books where I go hardcore into that. So,
fun,
fun. Where there's definitely a heaven dimension, quote unquote. So yeah, maybe at some point.
So you mentioned character development. One thing I've kind of wondered, in the beginning of the book, we learn a lot about Daniel's family. And we learn about that he lives with his father and his brother. They're in the book periodically throughout the second half of the book. Are we going to see them in Prisoner, or learn more about them and hear about them as well? Or are they kind of not part of the immediate story for Prisoner?
No, they will play an important plot. They are involved in an important plot point in Prisoner. And it also involves Eleanor Astor. Part of Eleanor Astor's motivation leading off in Prisoner, which is not a major spoiler. As soon as you get to her character in the book, you're gonna hear this. So this is not a spoiler. She promised Daniel in the first book, which, sorry, spoilers. It's been out for like 5.5 years. She promised Daniel in the first book she was gonna take care of his family, and Eleanor got to the point in her character where she very much values that promise, and that is going to be a driving motivation for her in the second book in Prisoner, and that is going to create some conflicts, because obviously this sort of allegiance to Daniel and driving interest in Daniel's family is going to be seen as a little bit unusual by magicians who just exiled him to hell. So that is going to be sort of the beginning of Eleanor's character arc in Prisoner, and I would say her story occupies about a third of Prisoner, and then the other 2/3 is what Daniel's up to.
Awesome. I'm excited because that was one of those things that I kind of liked their family dynamic at the beginning. That's kind of what initially hooked me into the story. There's this one scene where Zyke is walking with Daniel, or not walking, he's floating with as Daniel's walking down the street after an encounter with some bullies, and a car drives by with a Vorid on him, and I've visualized that scene a lot in my mind as kind of like him walking with his, he's going to see his family, and for some reason I keep coming back to that scene a lot whenever I think of the book, and so I'm excited to know I'm going to learn more about his family, what happens to them now that Daniel's not going to be with them.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny that's what sticks with you. You know, it's amazing how I know what you're talking about. And you know, I that was a thing I wrote offhand. That was like a little bit of extra. I was like, how do I make this real? And that is Daniel's walking down the street, and here's the frogman pestering him, and he sees just a car go by. It's just, you know, that happens. How many times does it happen to everybody? A million times a day, except there's the Vorid spawn latched onto somebody. And that and I was like, ooh, that's good. That's like a little thing and throw in there, and it's real, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that I got that reaction.
It worked. So another thing I wanted to ask. This is more of this is less story related, more just a general question. Video games come up with the AV nerds kind of in high school, and then also with his Daniel's friends he meets in college. I stream video games on Twitch. That's the majority of what I do now. Were video games a big part of your childhood? And if they were, is there any game or genre that kind of stands out as a favorite to you?
Oh yeah, I am a total video gameaholic, and definitely nerd culture, science fiction and fantasy, video games, that whole thing. I've watched plenty of anime, and I'm all about it. So that definitely drew on my own experiences. I would say lots of people ask me if, like, are you Daniel? You know, how much of Daniel is you? How much of you is Daniel? And I would say that definitely there's a lot of my personal experience in Daniel's experience. But the character I would most closely relate to, if you remember the scene where Daniel it's post battle against the bullies, which I really enjoyed writing that scene.
One of my favorite parts, honestly.
Yeah, it's great because I think it's a great demonstration of his character about how he thinks outside the box and doesn't, he brings the gun to the knife fight. There's the scene, he's walking home. He's beginning his walk home. It's actually very close to when the car drives by. And that one kid from the AV club, I can't even remember his name, but he kind of catches up to Daniel and says, "Hey, Dan, if you ever want to swing by the AV club, sorry we were hard on you earlier, but you had a plan, you came through." And Dan's like, yeah, sure, but he doesn't really mean it. I'm that character. That's who I was. That's who I was in high school. I would have been, and in fact, Daniel is someone who I would have admired as kind of a standalone guy who's willing to color outside the lines a little bit. But Daniel's experience in going to college and opening back up is also that is probably the most similar that he is to me. So, there's something of me in all the characters, but I would say I'm AV club member, so that's where I am in the book.
Makes sense. I like that answer. That's a good one. Because I was going to ask too. We were my wife and I were discussing. Is Daniel representative of you or someone that you knew? And so we know it's not you necessarily. Maybe a little bit here or there, but was there someone that you envisioned in your life as like that's my Daniel role model for how I'm going to form this person around those character traits and personalities?
Daniel's like if you took all the best parts of me. Well, no, see, Daniel's more complicated than that though. It's like if you, gosh, I don't know how to explain, because he's not, many of his experiences and ideas are very similar to mine, but there are some things Daniel does I would never do. I would consider so rude and so wrong. First of all, even just the prank war with the bullies, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't get involved. I just wouldn't. It's just not in my character. But I didn't want me to be the hero of the story. I wanted there to be a different sort of person. I would say that the most accurate I could give you is Jack's character is maybe some of the worst parts of me. Some of the cynical, bitter, paranoid bits of me form who Jack is. But Jack also has all that goodness in him too. All that longing to be belonged, to want to be somebody, to want to have a friend, in Daniel. And then many of Daniel's good characteristics also come from me. But there's a big blend. There was no person I have in my life who I was thinking of when I wrote Daniel. He he kind of is who he is. He's this blend of characteristics that I thought were interesting. His core concept was, he has to be a hero. He doesn't want to be a hero. He will always never want the power, because that goes back to what really the theme is of Contractor is, you know, that when you're faced with this massive temptation of unlimited power, you know, ultimate cosmic power, and there's no tiny little living space. You know, you don't have to be the genie. You just get it all. How does that warp people? How does that change their character? And who Daniel is the kind of person I imagine who will not be changed by access to incredible power. So that's the best description I can give you of Daniel. But I mean, and I'm not entirely sure that will continue to be the case. That's the concept of the book. I'm writing the book because I'm discovering it as well as I write it. Is it possible for someone to go on the hero's journey, be exposed to this much power, and remain the same person? I don't know. I think you could answer pretty honestly, no. So I mean, it remains to see. It remains to be seen. I have a lot more to write.
That's awesome. That's actually a really good transition into kind of the second half of the conversation I wanted to have. So you were mentioning that you're kind of discovering the story as you write it to a degree. Yeah. I had a question, and someone else from Reddit also had a question. Do you plan out your story kind of like a storyboard, like a movie, where you know it's going to progress from A to B to C? Or do you kind of create an environment and characters and let them play out the what feels natural for that character to do in those scenarios? Or is it kind of a mixture of both, maybe?
Yeah, it is. It's a mixture. But there's, if you ever listen to the pros talk about this stuff, you get two great examples. There's Brandon Sanderson. If you've read Mistborn or Way of Kings, yeah. Brandon Sanderson, I've listened to his lectures on YouTube. Excellent stuff. If you want to anyone who watches this, if you want to get into writing, he is the super outline writer. He is super organized. He outlines. He has all his plot arcs. He's got all his character arcs. He's got his setting notes. He's got these notes. He's got this notes. He structures his entire story in terms of its arcs, and then he writes the entire thing following that outline. And then the other side of the equation is Stephen King, who I understand. I have not looked into Stephen King as much, and I really want to. He is a discovery writer, or a gardener. That's what George R.R. Martin would call it. Is someone who just kind of throws a concept in there and then just kind of follows the characters and sees where they go and discovers things alongside them, or discovery writing. And it's called discovery writing. I am definitely more of a discovery writer, but I do have a certain organization in that I know where I want to start and I know where I want to get to, and I'll divide a story into major landmarks of plot where I know that I eventually want the characters are starting at A, and like 200 pages later, they should be around B. But what happens in between A and B? It could be a straight line. Sometimes it's a straight line. Sometimes the characters go over here and then back over here, and then eventually they get to B. And occasionally, the worst case scenario is they go so far that B is not realistic anymore. I have to abandon B, and that's probably my greatest problem writing, is I don't want to abandon B. I want the characters to go where I want them, even when I've written them to the point that they have no motivation to do what I want. And so that's definitely that's a struggle that I reconcile. Although I'm getting much better at that over time. But I have like kind of major landmarks, major story events plotted out, and then I figure out how my characters all get there. That's how I write.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So you kind of have like, you have this concept of what you want the story to evolve into, but you don't want to force the character against their natural tendencies, I guess.
Exactly. And that's it's as a writer, you have ultimate control over the characters. People who say, the character ran away from me. Well, it's an excuse. you can always write a motivation such that the character would be driven in the direction that you desire. It just depends on whether you have the will to do it or not. Because you
may
want to
involve some rewriting, which people don't want to do.
And that, yeah, really. And that's the thing about discovery writing is, I tried one time. I used the Sanderson method because this was on. I was doing NaNoWriMo. This was 5 or 6 years ago, and I was like, all right, I'm going to be professional about this. I'm going to do what people are suggesting. I'm going to have an outline. I'm going to do all my plot arcs. I'm going to do all my story arcs. I'm going to write this story in summary form from beginning to end. And I did. It was about like 25 pages long. I had kind of like characters start here, and then he goes and interacts with this person, and then this happens. I had the entire story mapped out from start to finish. I couldn't write it. I was so bored whenever I tried to write it, that I just couldn't really push myself to do it. It was like all the discovery had been sucked out of it. And I wasn't getting that joy and that excitement of like kind of having all that vague space to fill in where you're on your way to be, and then you're like, oh man, what about this thing over here? That's a great idea. Oh, you're like, oh, I'm gonna have to change this part earlier so that can happen, but it's so good, I've got to keep it. And then they go over here. Those are the moments that I love in writing. And so I can't do the solid structure. And what I thought was really interesting, going back to Sanderson's lectures, is he actually talks about this and he describes it in exactly those terms. And I was listening to him talk about it and I was like, oh my God, that was the problem. So I'm firmly in the discovery camp, but I have a list of characters. I've got like a little descriptive paragraph for every character that's been mentioned by name in the story. I have a kind of a lore sheet where I just purely have like these type of demons look like this, and they, a physical description and kind of a little blurb about their culture. I have all those. I have reference material, you could say, as I build it and as I create it. But the story itself does not have an outline.
So we kind of covered your writing philosophy, I guess was maybe the right term for that, or your process of writing.
Yeah.
And you kind of even talked a little bit about, because I was going to ask about, are there rules to your world? I guess the only example I can think of is like in Harry Potter, they're like, you can't bring people back from the dead. That's, once they're dead, they're dead. And it sounds like that's the case in this world too. I mean, there is a hell, so I assume people aren't dying and going there necessarily, because it sounds like that's where people get sent. It involves a process.
Yes, you will find out the answers to those specific questions in Prisoner. What is hell? Because obviously it's not a place you go when you die, because Daniel got sent there and he's not dead. And so what happens to people who actually die? And that is important. I will say no more. You will find out in Prisoner. You will begin to construct the idea of how these worlds work together.
Okay, perfect. So that kind of answers it. So basically, you do have like these rules and concepts, and again, that's coming from like your lore kind of sheet that you were talking about, where you've got like an explanation of kind of the background of the world.
Exactly. Yeah, there are rules. There are, one of the problems, oddly, I never had that problem, but people say in Harry Potter, like, oh, they have a time turner. Why don't they just use the time turner to do everything?
Right.
To basically void the entire story. We time turn back to when Voldemort was born, and it's no longer a problem. Why can't we go back and kill baby Hitler? But I never, despite the lack of consistency there, I never had a problem with that, because I figured there's some explanation why we just are not told.
Right. It's such a complex world.
Like the time
you can imagine there's some reason they wouldn't have just done the
exactly.
obvious.
Harry just doesn't know. We see through Harry's eyes. Harry doesn't know what the limitations of a time turner are. But yes, I do. There is logical consistency to my world. There are rules. There are limitations. Magic can do many, many, many things, but it can't do everything. Though breaking those limits is part of the whole motivation of the Vorid. They have their religious reasons, which are kind of, explained a little bit to us, that they have sort of this cult of the universe is going to die. We must be the catalyst of its rebirth. And the only way to do that is to essentially like gather all energy back.
They're kind of instigating the Big Bang to prevent the heat death.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's true. Yeah, I was like, what is the concern of a higher level civilization? They are concerned with the ultimate end of all things, and so in order to avoid that, they have to they come up with this wild idea to restart it all, in hopes that it can continue. And so that's one of the rules. How do you stop the end of all things? The heat death of the universe, when it's just atom soup, disassociated atoms and vacuum heat slowly dissipating into the ether. How do you avoid that awful fate of nothing ever existing ever again? Which is a pretty bad ending, to things.
Yeah.
When you think about it, it's pretty depressing
kind of
to think
worst
about
case scenario.
Exactly. So, of course, they have embarked on this course where they're going to solve the problem at all costs, which that's the source of the conflict, really.
Let's see. What was my next question? Because there was another good one I had.
I tend to ramble, as you can tell, so you have to stop me.
It's perfect, too. I've always liked having these types of deep conversations about things. I was part of a social engineering group that had a lot of people, not a lot, there were a handful of us that really liked having deep conversations about things like the end of the universe.
Sure.
And so these are types of things that I just always enjoyed anyway. So I don't mind the rambling. I'm enjoying it a lot.
No, yeah, I totally get you there. And I do, in my stories, I do want that external consistency. I want there to be, okay, so we have this race of aliens, right? I mean, it's a cool concept that the race of aliens are going to come in and harvest sentient life. Okay. Well, why the hell would they do that? If you are a multiversal spacefaring species, who cares what humans are doing on planet Earth out in the, KDY middle of nowhere, multiverse, Z-alpha, designation? It doesn't matter. It has no bearing on their existence. There has to be a compelling, driving reason. A reason so important they have to go all the way out to the boondocks to Earth and start eating people, essentially start absorbing human life. So that my search for that kind of leads you into the direction of those big philosophical questions. Why would an alien race do that? You have to leap out very far to get really those real motivations. So I think that's good. I think it adds legitimacy. It adds this kind of solemn black backdrop. They're not just doing it because they feel like it or because they're evil. There is some legitimacy to what they're doing on a certain level.
Right. Yeah. You can see the logic that their minds have gone through to lead them down that path. Whether you agree with it or not, there's that foundation logic religion that they've believed in.
Exactly.
So this fits with our conversation well. Kind of with your writing process, what was the process like for coming up with these ideas for the universe and kind of that conflict of the magic and aliens and powers that people were going to develop? Was that something that just over the course of maybe thinking about it at the gym or walking around and just ideas started coming to you over time and you kind of slowly formed it? Or did you sit down and kind of really focus on what you wanted that world to involve or include?
Definitely, it's a combination of both. Because what happens is I'll be walking around, I'll be at the gym, just like you're saying, and I'll be thinking about it. My headspace is out in Vorid land, and the ideas will hit me, and I'll be like, "Oh, that's great!" And I'll have to I write it down on my cell phone, and then I draw from that pool of ideas I have to build the final concepts. But also when I'm writing, that's when the juices are flowing. That's really when I come up with a lot of stuff, even as I write. And many times I have to be very careful because I'll come up with great ideas that are good, but if I put it in when I'm 2/3 of the way through the book, I have to go back and change a couple things. I can't just say, and then Daniel developed an incredible new power and everything was saved. You have to be like, okay, hold on. You've gotta foreshadow this and lead up and be like, he was experimenting maybe earlier in the book, and then it suddenly in the dramatic moment it comes to fruition, and you get that payoff because you saw the earlier progression. But I mean, do you mean specifically? How did I come up with specific
Yeah,
ideas? Because
well,
there are definitely there's definitely references that I've drawn from. Yeah.
well, I guess the reason I'm kind of asking is because I have this one of my many creative goals I've had over the years. One of them was to create either a story. I even tried writing a book when I was younger. I mean, like middle school, maybe it was. I think I wrote like 20 pages. And then a couple years later, I read them and was like, these sentences aren't even really complete sentences, most of them. So I don't know where that is now. That's gone. It was about an alien invasion. Because I do like science fiction. I have not written anything with that intent since then. What kind of has my interest now would be to do something kind of like creating a game, like a board game or a text game where it's like a text adventure. And so something really simple. But I want to come up with a unique universe with specific rules and entities in it, create this environment so I can create little stories. Those are the types of things I would love to do. But part of the first step for me, or I imagine my first step would be to create that universe and kind of come up with the ideas of what is in that universe and what are the rules of that universe. Kind of like,
and, I mean, I can tell you, like, I love world building, and a lot of the core concepts for Contractor come from other media that I've watched or read. In fact, speaking of anime, one of the Amazon reviewers hit the nail on the head. One of them was like, "Oh, Shakugan no Shana, I think is the name of the anime. It's like my favorite anime of all time." I actually really didn't like it. I dropped it after like 4 episodes. It was not because it was bad, but because it was for a little bit of a younger audience than I was when I got around to it. It was a recommended anime, but I was a little bit too old for it. It was kind of middle grade. But it has this great concept where the demon comes along, freezes time in a little bubble, and then it'll start eating the humans. And only the kind of the magical warriors can fight the demons and save the normal people. So you can see where Contractor's coming from, where when the Vorid invade, they basically have this huge bubble that freezes and locks in place like a whole town so that they can quietly and secretly harvest all these people. And in Shakugan no Shana, they are replaced by a sort of spiritual shell that slowly fades. And this is said to kind of ease the transition for the mundanes so they don't notice anything. So, I mean, that's a blatant ripoff, let's face it. Now, to be fair to myself, I definitely put my own spin on it. I mean, it's not demons, it's aliens from outer space, you know, that have a totally different motivation. You know, they don't want to just fill their stomachs. They have this totally different style of doing things. But it definitely major inspiration there. I loved that concept. Even when I was watching that anime, I didn't like it, but I loved that concept. I was fascinated by that. And then where does Daniel come from? Much of Daniel's reluctancy, I've always been fascinated by an anti-hero that's just dragged along for the ride. You know, the
right.
jerk with
It's
the
very
heart gold,
popular in modern culture.
Yeah, everybody loves Han Solo. You know, everybody likes the cool, swaggering guy who he's kind of a jerk, but he's really cool. You like him, but then you're not sure if he's gonna turn out okay. But then at the end, he swings back in to save everybody. You know, that's a great character, and I wanted that for Daniel. The inspiring really thing that drove me in that direction was a manga that I read. I'm gonna butcher the title. It's really weird. It's like Lucifer and the Biscuit Hammer. And it's yeah, exactly. It's the Japanese are freaking crazy. We shouldn't have dropped the nukes on them. But it's basically the world is going to end because this giant hammer in the sky is going to drop and destroy the entire planet Earth. And it's up to these heroes to bond with these strange spiritual creatures, and they're going to go on a journey and stop the hammer from dropping. Basically, an angry god has decided humanity's done for. I'm tired of this crap, and they're going to wield this hammer and destroy the planet. And the heroes kind of have to go on a journey to prove that humanity's still worth it. Give us another chance. The main character of that story just wants nothing to do with it. He hates all the people around him. He doesn't want any. And I thought that was the funniest thing. And his spirit animal that kind of comes to call him to the adventure, is a lizard. And that's where I got the inspiration then for the Clyde, was that sort of the amphibian nature. Although I used frogs more, because I like that idea of a frog, because I think they're a little bit slimier than a lizard. Can be a cute animal companion. You could see the cuteness in a lizard if it was a cartoon, but a frog is a little bit. Not as many people like frogs. They live in swamps. They're not so clean cut, and I like that. I like that imagery. And that's kind of what I wanted for that character too.
Okay, so hopefully before the camera overheats again, the last real question I wanted to ask is kind of a two-parter. Do you have advice for people who kind of want to do something kind of in the same steps that you have taken? Because I know your first book, Contractor, was self-published. Then you worked with Podium Publishing to do the audiobook. I'm kind of wondering what that process was like, and what kind of advice you might have for someone who wants to go down that route themselves.
Totally. The first thing you have to do is you have to write. You have to write a lot. You have to continue to write past. And I will say all this with the caveat that this is what worked for me. It's writing is art at a certain level, so all people are going to have a different experience. But it's also a skill. You can be. Yeah, every painting is a piece of art, but we can tell the difference between good paintings and bad paintings. We can tell the difference between ones that were done with skill and ones that are more amateurish, which is fine. It's okay to be an amateur. I look at me. I would class myself as an indie author. I'm an amateur, pretty middling successful, but definitely still learning, still building my skill. So the key to being good at anything is to do it a lot. Do it a whole lot, and be okay with being mediocre at first. And that's what I did. I was lucky. I just wrote because I enjoyed it, so I didn't stop. I wrote a lot of books, a lot of different books, a lot of character concepts, a lot of different things. And you will look back maybe when you go to edit some of your stuff, and you'll say, "Oh, that's not good." Go look at books that do it right. Look at stories that you love. Look at how they write. What did you like about the book? What was your favorite part? Why was it good? Those are fundamental questions you can ask yourself to get into writing. And I think a lot of writers, they'll write their one book and it's their baby, and they sit on it and they baby it and they baby it and they baby it. They're constantly always editing it and they're throwing it at the wall, trying to get it to stick. And sometimes it does. There's stories of writers who they write their book and they try to sell it for 20 years and they finally have their big breakthrough. But that's the exception. That's not the rule. You want to work on your talent as a good writer. And there's nothing wrong with writing that great book and then trying to get it to sell. But in the meantime, keep writing. Write other things. And that will develop the skill that you need to be successful. And it will teach you when people read your book and get your book read, join a writing group with other writers who also know what they're doing and are going through a similar experience, or with people you trust, just friends and family. Have them read your book. Ask them to tell you what they didn't like, and that's a great way to get better at it. And then I would also say what I did in order to build a fan base. That's just writing in general. But what I did to build a fan base is I did a lot of free stuff. Way back in the day, I did like a choose your own adventure thing that I did on a forum on as one of the it was back on 4chan, I believe.
Wow. Ironically, that's kind of what I was interested in, was a choose your own adventure. Then my wife texted me, she's like, "You mean choose your own adventure?" I'm like, "Yep, that's what I was trying to think of earlier."
Yeah, and that, built a little Twitter following out of that because people were interested in following it. And then I posted another free story, one of the other series that I wrote called Dream Drive, which has a lot of people have read that and are really. People have commented on my Facebook all the time, "Hey, when's Dream Drive coming back? When are you getting back to that?" I love that. So that, and that will return eventually. But that got people interested in what I was doing. And then I could say, "Hey, you like that stuff that I'm writing? Here is the book that I've published." And I was able to transfer that into kind of an initial role of book sales. And that is what took off and made Contractor a pretty good success for someone who did it all on their own. So you have to take steps. intentional steps in order to build a following. And there's lots of great platforms. If you're interested in science fiction and fantasy, go write a story that may or may not be the best story in the entire universe, but it's your story. You love it. Maybe you're not comfortable publishing it for money. You don't think it's polished or professional enough. Fine. Go put it on a fan fiction website. Go put it on Royal Road. That's a fantastic fiction website. Go put it on fanfiction.net. Get people reading and following your stuff. And then you can plug at the end, hey, by the way, I'm going to go do this thing, which is going to make you money later. So that's a way where all by yourself you can build a following. That's what I did, and it's working pretty good.
Awesome. Thank you very much. That's all I had for questions. Is there anything that you want to say before we end?
No, I'm honestly, I'm really grateful and flattered that you even thought to do this. So I thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed having my brain picked. It's fun to talk about. Also, I will not let the story linger for another 5 years. It's not going to happen. I'm already writing book 3, and I've got the bug really, really fierce. I really want to write this story, and I can't wait to write this story. So well, I'm very excited about it.
That does remind me of one more thing I wanted to ask. Is it a trilogy, or is there potentially more books?
There will be at least 4 books.
At least 4.
Because
okay.
There is no way I can finish it all in book 3. There is way too much that has to happen, especially Prisoner. You will see. Prisoner opens the world wide open. There's a lot going on. And there's a lot of big players that will be introduced in Prisoner. But I think in order to facilitate that, I will not necessarily make the next book as long as Prisoner, because I want to get something out. My goal is to try to get something out within a year. I think in Prisoner I put untitled 2022. That's me being conservative.
Yeah. I actually did cheat. I looked ahead to see if there was a heads up at the end.
Yes. Yeah, I did. I was conservative for myself and put 2022. I would really like to get something in 2021. It may not be as long as Prisoner, but just to progress the story, and do a little bit of justice to fans who waited for so long on a cliffhanger. I have the weirdest fan base in the world. They're like, it's small, but incredibly intense. It's like everybody waited the 5 years. And it's like, we're really angry at you.
I did.
but okay. So I mean, I definitely, I appreciate that. I'm very thankful for that level of dedication. It's incredibly flattering. I never could have imagined that things I just wrote because I had a story to tell would be that well appreciated by people. And it's really, really nice. And I want to return that appreciation by not letting everybody hang for that long again. So I've got the bug. I'm writing. Don't worry, I will update the Facebook. I don't like Facebook, but I will pursue it. So you know what's going on. So stay tuned. More is coming.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'll end with a final plug. The Contractor, awesome, great audiobook. It's out now, and just today, Prisoner Book 2 has released. So thank you very much for the time. I know during the COVID situation, you're an essential person, taking care of people, keeping people alive. So appreciate what you do, and really appreciate you taking the time to do this. So
yeah, absolutely. No, thank you.
Yep. And until next time, I guess. Hopefully.
Yeah. Hey, yeah. You know what? Maybe we'll do another one next time, huh?
Awesome.
Tell me.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right. I'll go ahead and I'll stop the recording. If you made it this far, you are truly either a Ja Rule fan or an Andrew S. Ball fan. Please click the thumbs up button and consider subscribing and turning on notifications. Also, leave some constructive comments or questions for either of us below. I appreciate you listening to the interview. This isn't the type of thing that I'll do very often, but I'm trying to branch out and grow as a content creator. Join us on Discord for Twitch livestream announcements and movie nights, and check my other social media for cute puppy pics. Thanks again, and see you next time.